the Alberta Teachers Association respectfully acknowledges that we are located on Treaty 4, 6, 7, 8 and 10 territories, the traveling route, gathering place and meeting grounds for Indigenous peoples, whose histories, languages, cultures and traditions continue to influence our vibrant community. We are grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today, and those who have gone before us. We recognize the land as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside on or are visiting.
Attention amazing Alberta inclusive educators. Mark your calendars for the 2025 Council for Inclusive Education Annual Conference, Celebrating the Challenges, happening May 23rd and 24th at Hotel Arts in Calgary. This year, we're thrilled to welcome Dr. Lori Dezotel and Joanna Johnson as our keynote speakers, bringing their expertise and passion for inclusive education. Don't miss out on this opportunity to connect, learn, and be inspired. For all the details, follow CIE on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook or visit cheducation.ca. See you there!
Welcome to Season 2, Episode 3 of the Inclusive Chronicles, Tips and Tricks for Inclusion in Alberta. I'm your host, Kelsey Bagnall, and today I am thrilled and honored to welcome my mom as today's guest speaker, Gail Astle. Gail is my mom, and she is a parent of a child that has dyslexia. So on today's episode, we are going to dive into the parent perspective of having a child that has dyslexia and hopes and dreams that she had for me as I was growing up, but also her hopes and dreams for her grandbabies as they currently grow up. We hope you enjoy today's episode. Thanks for listening. Welcome, everybody. My name is Kelsey Bagnall, and I am the CIE Communication Officer for the Council for Inclusive Education with the ATA. Today, I'm very thrilled to welcome my mom to be part of our podcast, and I'm going to hand the mic over to my mom and get her to introduce herself. So go ahead.
Hi, my name is Gail Astle, and as Kelsey has already shared, I am her mom and have been since the beginning.
Okay, so I'm going to call you mom because you're my mom throughout this, and I'm not going to call you Gail. So just so you know that. So mom, the reason I invited you to have a conversation with me today is I have a learning disability in the area of reading and written expression. It would be considered, if we looked at like dysgraphia, dyscalculia, dyslexia, it would fall under the umbrella of dyslexia. And so I wanted to invite you to have a conversation today to talk about the perspective of being a parent of a child that has dyslexia or learning disability, so that we could gain insights from the parent perspective and maybe some wishes in which you could lend us on how you wish collaboration between school and home could have gone, or what was really successful. So maybe we can go all the way back to the early 90s when I was a little human in grade 1 and grade 2. And maybe we can talk about your experience as being a parent and what you thought as I was learning to read. So do you want to kind of give us some background on my journey early on?
So it became apparent through communication from the teachers that you were struggling with the reading piece. And I was trying to be a good mom, and I was reading stories to you and your brother every night, one parked on one side of me and the other on the other, and we would read the stories. And I was doing that. And then when I was trying to help you read, I was using what I knew from my life, which was phonics, and that you would sound out words. At least that's what I thought you should be able to do. but you didn't have that understanding at all about sounds and letters and what the sounds would be. And so I was trying to help you as best I could. I went to the teacher. I asked for help, direction. What could I do to help you? And I said, and she doesn't understand the sounds of letters. And the teacher said, well, we don't teach that. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, that's not how we teach it now. We teach whole words. And I found that very frustrating and very difficult. And I said, well, then what can I do to help you? And the teacher said, well, you can do flashcards. So I made a million flashcards, and we did flashcards, and it didn't seem to really work. And I was very frustrated, for sure. And I felt like a horrible mom, and I didn't know what to do. It was very exasperating. And being a single mom, it was like all on me, and I just wanted to be the best mom possible. And this was totally frustrating.
And knowing that it was frustrating, and I just want to clarify, you're not a teacher you're not an educator, a K-12 educator, right? You're just not just a mom, but you're a mom.
Yes.
And that was the lens you were coming to the teacher with, is being a mom.
Yeah.
And so in being that mom and having the conversations with school on how things were going and not seeing the progress, even though you were following through with what school was suggesting you would do, what were your next steps?
Well, as you know, you were assessed. And they did recognize and verbalize and report that you did have challenges with your reading and written expression, as you talked about. But that was confirmation, but it wasn't guidance on how to help you.
As a human that remembers going through this, and once again, this is my story, so I'm okay to jump in and say it. I remember reading was hard, and I didn't learn to really read until I was much older than the average duck at that time. And for me, I never really liked reading as a child. I don't remember loving picking up a book and reading. And it was never like my go-to pastime because it wasn't fun and it was hard for me. Do you remember having conversations with the school after I was diagnosed in the early 90s?
Well, they were still stuck on that, to me, ridiculous approach to reading, which was the whole words. and that to me was not helpful at all. And there was no different strategies offered to me. And so it was like I was watching you struggle and be frustrated. And it was not a great experience at all for you. And it was very painful for me because I didn't know how to help you. And the school didn't seem to be helping you either. So it was really, really difficult.
If you had a magic wand and you could go back to that situation, what is one thing that you wish could have changed in that situation for you as a parent with me in school?
That they used phonics.
Okay.
Because I wanted to talk about the sounds that letters made when we were reading. And I would, wanted to be able to point to a letter and say, what sound does that make? But that was not what you were being taught. And I didn't want to be contrary to what the school approach was, because they're supposed to be the experts. But it was not a great approach because it wasn't working for you. And I just thought, as you grow through life and you encounter new words, having that phonics knowledge in your background is how you can sound words out and kind of figure out what they are. And that wasn't an option. So it was really, really difficult.
Okay, fair enough. And I remember not understanding how words work. And as an adult that has dyslexia, I struggle with spelling, and that is probably how you see my dyslexia displayed now as an adult. Is I have a really hard time with spelling words because I don't. It's not innately in my brain on how letters and sounds are connected. When I go to spell unique or words that I don't spell on a regular basis. So for me as an adult, it still impacts me. It impacts me in a different way than it did when I was in elementary school, into junior high, middle school, into high school. I don't know if you remember, Mom, but I remember lots about my experience going through high school with English. English was not my favorite subject, but I wanted to be a teacher. I identified, I think, really early on, and you'll probably remember that,
Oh,
that
yes.
I wanted to be a teacher from a very young age. And so knowing that I wanted to be a teacher meant that I had to go to university, and going to university required me in the early 2000s to have the course at that time, which was called English 30. It was English 30 and English 33 at the time. And right now we would consider it 30-1 would be a similar equivalent. And so for me, I remember being in grade 12. And at that time, our high school diplomas were worth 50% of our final grade. And certain pieces of coursework that we did were also on our reading comprehension part of the diploma, which was worth 50%. So at that time, our diplomas were 50%, 50% of that 50%. So 25 of my percent of my final grade in English 30 would have been based off of reading comprehension, and the other 25% of my final grade in English 30 at that time would have been based off of my written part of the diploma. And I remember very clearly having novel studies in English 30, and my teacher is as good as the teacher could be at the time, and I won't identify the person because that's not fair to them. But I remember having to know Hamlet for not only my in-class mark and going through that, but also at that time there were certain Shakespearean pieces that were required at the different levels in high school, so 10, 20, and 30. And Hamlet was the one that was required at 30, and it was on, or would be on, my English 30 diploma, which, like I said, the reading comprehension at that time was worth 25% of my final grade, which dictated if I could go to university or not. And so I remember in English 30 going in and going, I don't have a hot clue what Hamlet is about. I struggle with reading as it is as a human being, let alone English from the 1600s, and not understanding the words at that time. And so I remember, using the Coles Notes version of Hamlet to understand it, and then going out and purchasing the Coles Notes version in plain English version of Hamlet. And I got in trouble in grade 12 because that wasn't the real Hamlet. And I remember advocating for myself. And I've always been a questioner. And I think one of the reasons I have been a questioner is because school was hard, and I tried to accommodate for myself in lots of different ways. And I did it in post-secondary as well. But because I tried to accommodate for myself, it looked like I was being bad. And so I got in trouble in grade 12 for having the plain English version. And I remember saying to my teacher, if I don't have this, I don't understand it. And if I don't understand it, I can't do the work. and then I can't get into teachers college. And I remember going into parent-teacher interviews. I waited to do English 30 to the last semester of grade 12. And so I wrote my English 30 diploma in June of my grade 12 year. I waited. And I remember going into parent-teacher interviews that spring, and you came with me, and you had advocated my entire career as a student, and you saying to the teacher, well, she has a learning disability, like what do you expect? And I remember the teacher at the time had no idea. It was like it had been lost in paperwork, and it had been lost in what I needed to be a successful student. But I had been fairly successful in other coursework, because an LD doesn't impact your intelligence. It impacts how you receive information and express your information. And so for me, I was able to get around and accommodate for myself through many of my courses, but English was really hard to do that. And I remember that in grade 12, that parent-teacher interview, it was the first time in my entire K to 12 career being given an accommodation. I was allowed, because of that, and they went digging, to write my English 30 diploma on a computer. And at that time, spell check was a huge accommodation, and I was allowed to have it on my English 30 diploma. And I think for me, now being an educator and knowing all what the things that I know, had I not had you advocate in that grade 12 parent-teacher interview, I don't think I would be in the place that I am now, because I'm not sure I would have passed the grade 12 diploma had I not had the accommodation that I did. And if I had not passed the grade 12 diploma, I would not have passed English 30, and I would not have been able to go to university when I did. And so I think for me as an educator, but also as a human that has a learning disability in this area, or dyslexia, like I remember it being hard, but I remember also that like you advocated for me, and had I not had that advocation and the educator not listened, I likely wouldn't be where I am today. And so as a parent who watched their child go through school, who didn't love reading and didn't love those pieces, like, is there anything else past the phonics that you would have changed, or would hope to change, or would hope has changed for your grandbabies, for parents?
Well, I know that they teach reading differently now, and that is really important. And I know that from reading stories with my grandkids, and they get sounds, and that's to me a huge piece of it, because it would, no matter what words you encounter, if you know the sounds, you can sound out the word. And lots of times the word may look weird as it's spelled, but when you sound it out, oh, it's like, oh, I know that word. It's just that you didn't know how it was spelled. And so that would have been awesome. It would have also been awesome had the learning challenges that you were experiencing, if there had been other tools offered other than flashcards, because I continued to do flashcards and I continued to read always with you and your brother, and it really didn't help. So I did not feel empowered with the tools I needed to help you. And if I could change anything, it would be that they had tools that would actually have helped you. And now I know there's all kinds of technical tools that are available that weren't available when you were a little girl.
And as an adult, I went through a reassessment. I did get into university. I did my education degree, and I accommodated for myself throughout my education degree. So I completed it in 5 years versus 4. I waited to take the 6-credit English class until the very last point in my education degree, so that I had the most experience I could have in writing at a university level and reading university text to understand so that I'd be as successful as I possibly could in reading and writing and being successful in English at a university level. And I remember in English, taking it and waiting as long as I did. And I had to write 3 essays in 2 hours for part of my final exam. And I remember saying to my professor, there's just no way. Like, there's not a hot chance that I will be successful in doing that. And I said, I have a learning disability. And he said to me, it's not on file. There's nothing I can do. You need to go and talk to what is equivalent to student services at the university. And so in doing so, I was able to get extra time on my final exam for that English class. But to get that extra time in university, I had to agree to go through reassessment. And I went through reassessment my last year of my education degree. And it confirmed what I knew from when you had me assessed earlier in my life. And I still have that assessment report, and I go back and I look at it because it's very much, I knew myself at that point as a learner very, very well, especially because I had gone through and I had already done student teaching at the point when I had reassessment. And it's very interesting because at that point, I was in my early 20s when I went through reassessment, and the strategies and the recommendations that came out of that psych ed were all in the area of compensatory strategies, which is like using speech to text to listen to books versus having to read them, or using speech to text is being able to speak and it type out for you, or text to speech to be able to listen to books. And at this time in the early mid 2000s, those technologies were still fairly new, and we at that point weren't as well versed in them as we are today. But it wasn't about remediation at that point. And I always say, and you might remember me saying this, is the best remediation I've ever had was having to teach grade 1 and having to teach the phonics and the patterns and the phonemic awareness to my students, because I had to learn it to be able to teach it. And so the best remediation I've ever had for my learning disability, for my dyslexia, was having to teach it. And I learned the patterns and the spelling and the morphology and the syllable divisions and all of that in my late 30s, not when I was 6, not when I was 7. I was in my late 30s. And so I always say, like, remediation is still an option for anybody that needs it later on in their whenever. It's not going to hurt you, but you don't only use remediation. It's good to use the compensatory strategies. I have AI as an adult edit most of my emails because I still miss words, connecting words when I write sentences, and I do that. How did you help me as a university student? Do you remember what you did for me my entire university career as an accommodation that wasn't an official accommodation?
No, you're going to have to share because that's a while ago when I
Do you
had you
remember
drop.
me bringing every paper to you?
Oh, yes, that's true. Yes.
And what did you do with every paper that I brought to you?
Well, I proofed it.
You were my editor. You
Yeah.
you went through and read it. And it wasn't because my ideas weren't good. It was because writing was hard and I missed words. And I might have chosen a word that I knew how to spell, but there was a better word that I could use instead. Or I chose a word that I thought was a word that I meant to spell, and it was a word that was spelled similarly but had a completely different meaning. And so you did that for me my entire undergraduate degree, and you actually did it even within my master's degree.
Yeah. Yes.
You
You did.
edited.
Yeah, you shared some of your papers and but I'm coming from a place where English was my strong suit.
Yeah.
And I was very good at English in school, and I was a good speller and all of those kinds of things. So that's where it was very hard for me to try and help you because I didn't know how to help you. And I certainly couldn't relate to what you were, the challenges you were having, and nobody was giving me any strategies or tools or methods where I could assist you when you were a kid.
All right. So I think for me, knowing my journey and hearing you and I have talked about this lots, just in offhanded conversations, and now being a parent myself and advocating for my kids, I think what you and I have talked about is having that open communication where both sides are heard, and our concerns are heard as a parent, but also our concerns as teachers are being heard. And having that open communication is a really important thing to help the child be successful at school and learn the things that they need to be successful. Is there any final words that you would suggest bringing forward to help support that school, home, parent, teacher partnership to support a child?
Well, I was always even though I was a single mom and working full time, I was always very involved with the school. And I did have a really good relationship with the admin staff and your teachers through the years. But that didn't give me the tools I needed to help you. And that was, without question, very frustrating.
Okay, so tools and knowing the how to help would have helped.
Yes.
All right. Well, I'm going to say thank you so much to you for talking to me today, and I'm going to say goodbye.
Bye-bye.
As an organization that promotes and is committed to respecting human rights and ensuring a safe, secure, and healthy environment for all, the Alberta Teachers Association, ATA, works to ensure that all present or participating in ATA programs and events are protected from violence and harassment. All ATA members are therefore expected to promote and defend the fundamental human rights of everyone engaged in ATA programs, activities, or other ATA work. ATA members are expected to treat one another with fairness, respect, and dignity, and to uphold the highest standards of professionalism, accountability, competence, and integrity as representatives of the provincial association, as well as their respective locals and subgroups. Furthermore, ATA members are obliged to act to prevent violence and harassment wherever possible, and report to the appropriate person in authority any suspected breaches of this policy that come to their attention.